Good morning and welcome to the opening of week 2 in the IPA 2020 Masterclass series. My name is Gio George. I'm a Senior Advisor of Planning and Risk from the Victorian Public Sector Commission. And on behalf of Miles Hutchinson and Shahan Bajwa, the co-chairs of the IPA Victoria Committee and the entire committee, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this event. I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're all meeting on today, wherever that might be, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. So welcome to this event. I want to start by telling you a little bit about IPA Victoria. If you haven't joined us for one of these events before, IPA Victoria is a member-driven organisation which connects, empowers, and celebrates Victoria's public purpose sector. Young professionals are a key part of the sector, and the IPA Victoria community is an important part of this. So thank you to IPA for putting on this event, and especially the IPA community for making all this happen. But events such as this simply wouldn't happen without the support of our partners. Partners such as our major partner for this event, the Victorian Public Sector Commission, our new Commissioner Adam Fennessy, who's with us here today, and the Deputy Commissioner Julie Griffith and the entire team. Thank you for your support. The work that Vpsc does across the sector for young professionals is greatly appreciated. To our supporting partners, the Victorian Managed Insurance Authority, special thanks to Andrew Davis and his entire team for the support of young professionals across the sector. And lastly, to Deloitte, and in particular to Ellen Derrick, Deloitte's National Public Sector and Public Policy Lead, along with Ian Tevera, Deloitte's Victorian Public Sector Lead, and the whole team. Thank you for supporting the Masterclass series. These events, and in particular this event, would not be possible without the support of partners such as these. So thank you on behalf of the entire committee and the whole audience. Now, just a few housekeeping things. I could see we've got quite a few attendees joining us. And it's not every day that we have an opportunity to have two very senior, very experienced, very knowledgeable public sector leaders in front of us, and to be able to ask questions. So let's not let this opportunity go by the wayside. Let's ask plenty of questions to these two leaders. And if you have a question at any time throughout this event, type them into the Q&A panel. There's a box where all the questions can be seen, and you can actually upvote the questions that you like. So at the end of the event, we'll get to the top voter questions and we'll ask them to Greg and Adam, our two guests here today. So before we commence, I just want to give you a quick reminder that this session is being recorded, and we hope to be able to share this after the conclusion of the session. Now, today we're going to be talking about change. And as I said at the start of the event, it's a fitting time to be talking about change. And I think you would certainly agree that as we're all dialing in from different locations, some maybe in very comfortable clothes, not in that usual business attire, we could all acknowledge that there's been considerable amount of change in the very recent time. So today's topic is about change and how we might anticipate change, and not just that, but also lead through the uncertain times that we find ourselves in. I can tell you that as a strategy and risk professional, I've made an entire career out of anticipating change. And the hallmark of any good strategy or risk management is to prepare today so you can leverage the opportunities and navigate the risks that tomorrow presents. So in these times of increasing uncertainty, I think we must all acknowledge that the one constant has really been change, right? And when I proposed the title for the event to Greg, that change is the new normal, Greg sort of said, change isn't the new normal, it's always been the normal. So the question that we'll be exploring today is, how do we ensure that the public purpose sector changes through anticipation rather than through crisis? To answer this question and to explore further, we're really privileged to be hearing from Greg Wilson, an individual whose leadership as Secretary of 2 government departments and as chairperson for multiple major organizations has changed and continue to shape and change the public policy landscape in Victoria. And I'm also really excited that today's session and the discussion with Greg is going to be moderated by Adam Fennessy, the Victorian Public Sector Commission. Now, Adam is my boss, so there's a bit of a pressure in the introduction, but I'll keep it short and sweet because he is well known across the Victorian public sector. He has over 20 years of public sector experience at both state and federal levels, including 4 years as Secretary of the Victorian Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. And prior to that, the Department of Environment and Primary Industries. I think more recently, Adam has worked as a public sector advisory partner at a global firm, Ernst & Young. But we are delighted and very fortunate to welcome Adam back to the public sector as Victoria's new Public Sector Commissioner. Adam is also no stranger to IPA Victoria, having served on the board as Deputy President some time ago, and now he's also a Fellow of the Institute. A proud and committed public servant, Adam was also awarded the Public Service Medal for Leadership in 2018. So without further ado, I would love to hand over to Adam and introduce Greg today. So Adam, thank you and welcome to the event.
Thank you very much, Gio. Thank you, everybody. It's so exciting to see so many of you joining us today live online. And what we're finding is there are some benefits of these challenging times we're working in. One benefit is that online opportunities and events mean it can be a lot more straightforward for us to attend. You don't have to have travel time. You can just be there and you can wear comfortable clothes. I think we got the memo of a dark blue top today between Gio, Greg and I, so that's good. And it also is a really good opportunity to have a really good moderated discussion, and we're very keen, after we've heard from Greg, for you to put your questions forward, and as the moderator, Greg and I will have a really good chat, particularly around your questions, reflecting on some of Greg's key insights. I'll say a couple of quick words myself, and then I'll introduce Greg, and then Greg, I'll throw to you. So I'll start by acknowledging the land on which I am today and the traditional owners past, present and emerging. I'm on the land of the Kulin Nations. I'm in East Melbourne. And I want to pay, as well as paying my respects to elders past, present and emerging, I want to acknowledge the other lands that you're all on. And I see in a lot of your introductions, people are telling us where you're dialing in from and what lands you're on. So thank you for that. I am very excited to be here in my first IPA and YIPA event as the Victorian Public Sector Commissioner. This is my third week as the Commissioner. However, it's not my first time involved with YIPA or IPA. I was thinking the other day, I remember doing a YIPA event, and I reckon it was in about 2008 or 2009. And whenever it was, I think I just missed the cutoff of being young enough to be in YIPA, but I was able to present. And it struck me way back then, as it does now, that YIPA is a great driving force and lifeblood of not just public sector professionals, but public sector leaders. So I do want to start just by a quick shout out to Miles, Sean and Gio for your organisation and the support from Kim Hyde from IPA, because that sort of organisation for these discussions and events, that is your leadership coming through, particularly at a time of challenge such as that we are in. I'm also very excited to be back working alongside IPA Victoria. I was on the board for a number of years, as Gio outlined. And in more recent times, when I was working in the private sector, I was fortunate to do work across Australia with IPA New South Wales, WA, IPA South Australia, IPA ACT, as well as an ongoing relationship with IPA Victoria and IPA Queensland. So I was working with nearly every IPA because I love the public purpose sector. And to me, that networking and engagement across the public sector in Victoria, as well as across Australia, is a critical part of what we do. So I am a very passionate advocate of public purpose and that connection that IPA and YIPA can bring. And as part of that, I do want to give a quick shout out, as Gio did, to VMIA, Andrew Davies, and also Deloitte, to Alan and Ian. Your support and sponsorship and involvement with IPA and IPA Victoria and YIPA is so important. And we're very proud at the Vpsc to be a principal partner as well. Now, many of you will be aware of the VPSC, some of you won't. What do we do? Well, a great way of me thinking about what the VPSC does is we are the Department of People for Victorian Government. So our vision is to have a strong, diverse public sector workforce that's values driven, well equipped, well supported, so that we can deliver not just high quality services across Victoria, but also bring that leadership at times of challenge and change. And that goes back to the core responsibilities of the Victorian Public Sector Commission of strengthening the efficiency, the capability and the integrity of the Victorian public sector. So what I'll do now is get ready for our guest speaker. This is an exciting time, even though it's a difficult time, because we do have these unique opportunities to reflect how are we working together during the coronavirus and pandemic and response. How are we thinking not just about ourselves and our colleagues and our organisations, but about people across Victoria and indeed nationally as we deliver critical services across the public sector. Everything from the clear ones for now, like health and public safety, to those really critical ones that we're beginning to see the importance of, like transport, logistics, land management, community support, mental health. There are that many things that we're doing across the public sector to help our communities. And these are the times of challenge to think, well, what are the opportunities that are coming out of these changes? So in terms of what you're doing, what are the things that you as young professionals are learning from these challenging times? What are you taking out of this? How are you developing and building your own leadership? And in particular, how are you using these opportunities for you as young professionals in times of change, which would be a key theme of Greg's reflections. So I'll now turn to Greg. I'm very excited to be introducing Greg. Lockdown is really difficult, but Greg is currently in Jan Juk, which I think is Wadawurrung country, although Greg, you will tell me. But Jan Juk on the beautiful surf coast of Victoria has got to be one of the better places to be in lockdown. Greg, I have known and worked with for many, many years. Some of you will be aware, Greg was not only the Secretary of the Department of Justice and Regulation, but he was the Secretary of the Department of Sustainability and Environment when I worked with Greg. Greg is an inspiring leader and a wonderful leader. And one of the best things I got out of working for Greg was the support he gave me in my own public sector career. And a lot of what I was able to achieve was thanks very squarely to Greg. Greg is an IPA Fellow, and having led two very large and complex departments, he continues his leadership as Chair of the Transport Accident Commission, which is based in Geelong, as well as the Chair of the State Emergency Service. And just in case Greg's got any spare time on his hands, he's now the Chair of the Country Fire Authority Board. And I know there'll be a few other things Greg's doing at the moment. I think chairing my Risk and Audit Committee that Geo and I support, which is fantastic. So as well as leading an enormous range of public sector reforms, Greg has also worked through many times of change, including the present time of change, where you can hear the leadership he's providing on those boards across some critical Victorian public sector entities. So as I throw to Greg, I know I've had a slight sneak preview at his notes, and one thing he was going to talk about was VUCA. And I'm not going to tell you what VUCA is. I thought, wow, was that a band from the 90s, a guitar pop band that I missed out on? Or is it something else? And as a fun fact, because I'm sure everyone wants to know at least one fun fact about Greg, I think Greg would have been the only secretary in Victorian government, probably Australia, to have seen both Nick Cave and Iggy Pop live. Although I can think of one secretary from New South Wales who actually probably has seen those two artists. So he's probably one of the only two secretaries. And that shows that Greg's got a wide range of taste and talent. And if people haven't heard of Iggy Pop, I know with Nick Cave, he did a very well supported live performance that was streamed the other day on globally. So Greg's got great taste in music, as well as being an incredible public sector leader. So Greg, with those words of introduction, I'm going to throw to you. And then after we've heard from Greg, we're going to go to Q&A, and with Greg and myself and you all, we're going to take your questions about those opportunities for young professionals in times of change. So a big digital clap for Greg. Over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Adam. And can I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land? We're all on, in my case, you're right, Wallarong people down here in Janjuk. Pay my respects to their elders past and present, and Aboriginal community members that may be dialing in here this morning. And also a bit of a shout out for our colleagues in the public purpose sector who are dealing with COVID and so on, and some pretty difficult times, and those in the community that are dealing with that and loss of loved ones and so on. It is quite a challenging set of circumstances we find ourselves in this morning. So I basically wanted to provide a few reflections on, well, three things: the nature of change in the public purpose sector, the sorts of tools and capabilities that you need to develop to anticipate change, and third and finally, just reflect on how to embrace the opportunities that change presents and manage the risk and so on. And I guess a few topics for discussion in terms of your own careers and your own personal development in these times. So if I start with change, whenever people raise the issue of change, I automatically think of, well, there's all these things going on in the outside world, and as this title suggests, how do we anticipate those things and get ready for things, and almost like react to change. But I think it's important to note also that the public purpose sector has a role in anticipating the future and identifying things where it needs to drive change, particularly in community behaviour. So if I think of the examples of the first part, the anticipating change and keeping up with things, there's been a few interesting examples, particularly around the digital age and social media, just in preparing for this talk over the last month or so. One was the Council of Attorneys General looking at defamation laws. So defamation laws in Australia, there was a national uniform defamation laws adopted in early 2006. And I was quite interesting. Like, to me, that doesn't seem that far away, but Facebook wasn't even invented then, let alone Twitter and all these other, social media vehicles. So you see the Attorneys General now dealing with the issues of who's responsible and who's liable for defamatory content on those platforms. The ACCC recently, they're in a consultation process around paying for content and so on with Google and Facebook. There's been a recent report on, when you think about the gig economy, which is something that was born out of that, the digital age and software development, as well as a GFC where people could earn money by doing what's referred to as on-demand work. Well, now the issues are turning to things like workers' rights. I think it was the Treasurer, or in his capacity as Minister for Industrial Relations, kicked off a process. Natalie James, I think, is with Deloitte now, doing an inquiry on those sorts of issues, as these are the sorts of things starting to emerge from the technology. Of course, rideshare, Uber, taxi reforms, a range of those things. The big emphasis now on cyber security. Ironically, Sunday before last, as I was doing a little bit of work, my internet went down, and I assumed it'd be my modem, and I got on the phone and on the 4G network and saw all the Telstra customers in Australia were their services were down because of some cyber attack that blocked the service delivery. So there's a lot of change, almost like, well, not almost, like exponentially occurring in that technology side of things, which I think means, even though I might say, well, there's always change and we shouldn't have a mindset of saying it's new, but I do think the last decade or so, technological change has been exponential, which means all the things that rely on that technology has changed exponentially as well. So you've had this incredibly rapid increase in those things. But there are other things like anticipating things like the community expectations around services. I remember years ago when these first online applications were developed, and you'd get on it and you'd say, look, I just wish I could just go see a person. Now, if I have to apply for something or do anything where I can't do it online, I just think it's, it's just not good enough. I should be able to just do everything online. But you do see, in anticipation of those sorts of demands, big efforts around things like proof of identity. I know when we, like births, deaths and marriages in the Department of Justice, that the inevitability, if you want a passport or something like that, someone has to physically look at you and look at a picture of you and your various documents. So there's a lot of effort going into trying to work through those sorts of issues. And I guess anticipating change, there's the usual things that as young public purpose professionals you're looking at in terms of growing demand, the shape of demand, if you're in local government, patterns of urban settlement, those more, I guess, service delivery aspects of anticipating change. So there's all those sorts of things that I think we need to be good at. But as I say, there's a range of examples where the public purpose sector is expected to anticipate the need to actually drive change itself. So it's not just reacting to things that are happening in the outside world. It's basically looking into the future to determine where the government should be leading community change. So in my world, of course, in the TAC, the road toll was a classic example of, you know, if you go back, I think it was 1970, there was over 1,000 deaths on the road. If you extrapolate that today with the population differences and so on, that'd be like several thousand deaths per annum. So the concerted efforts by successive governments ever since then, and that includes various arms like police, local government, TAC, justice and so on, Vic Roads, that partnership to tackle that issue, to change attitudes of drivers like drink driving and the more like road safety cameras, compulsory breath testing, all those sorts of things, which at the time, even going back to having to wear seatbelts, the community reaction is, you know, how can the government make me wear these things? Or a random breath test, you mean what, the police can pull me over when I've done nothing wrong and just test me? So there's all these kind of challenges that the government's really driven that change. And I know the TAC, for example, it was only a couple of decades ago when you'd have 25% of people admitted to drink driving, like 1 in 4. And today that's like more like 1 in 20. So those things are having a real impact. Adam would recall in our roles in the water, environment, energy space, the importance of modelling climate change. So I know in the case of water reform back to, you know, early 2000s, looking at what would have been a 5-year drought that turned into 12 or 13, and the various efforts to promote water conservation, water efficient labelling, the building regulations around water tanks and so on, dual flush toilets and all these things that were a big push by governments to actually change community attitude to those things. Pricing reforms, which I was involved with way back in the 90s in Melbourne, people probably wouldn't remember, but you just paid a big property rate like you would your council rates. And you could use as much water as you wanted, kind of thing. So the move to user pays pricing, all of those things in that space have been quite important in changing behaviour. Renewable energy, the incentives built in around that to promote those industries and what have you over the years. Bushfires, predictive modelling and what have you that goes into those things as well. And I think more broadly, as a public purpose sector, it's probably more of an expectation that we would drive things on social issues. So you think about family violence royal commissions, mental health royal commissions, the establishment of Respect Victoria, gender inclusion, diversity, and then the bigger public health campaigns. You would all, some may remember, you know, the AIDS campaign, the Grim Reaper, the skin cancer stuff, slip, slop, slap, all those things, drug and alcohol. So I would say in terms of the nature of the changes and the role and expectations of the public purpose sector, there's certainly the need to look into the future and anticipate change and keep up with it. But there's also the need to look into the future and determine where the public purpose sector needs to play its role in shaping change and driving change to either preempt problems or tackle issues before they arise. So there's some thoughts on change. If I go to what tools do you need to anticipate change and do those things? I think there are 3 levels in my mind. One is the identifying megatrends and making sure you have an understanding of those megatrends almost like globally. The second thing are the tools and capability to actually translate what's happening at that level into your world in the public purpose sector. And the third thing is almost like saying, well, irrespective of what's happening in those megatrends, what's actually going on in my particular area. So I think of the tools around megatrends are really easy. Like we're only one internet search away from the best available contestable advice from all sorts of consulting, including the sponsors for this event, Deloitte, think tanks, universities. There is so much material out there, good quality, contestable advice that, thanks to the digital age, is all out there for free. So identifying what they are is the easy bit. I think the next thing is the tools and capabilities to transfer the impacts of those mega trends to your particular area. What do they mean for you? Typically that part of that capability is more achieved by the way people come together and think through those things, and deliberate sessions to work through the implications. So if I think of, say as an example, the TAC, we'd say, well, technology and vehicle automation is a big thing, and it's making huge advances, and you'd go and see vehicles that are like autonomous vehicles. They can potentially connect to the traffic communication systems, so they can find optimal routes and journeys. They can time themselves to get through every green light, all those kind of technologies over and above the things that we've seen in terms of ABS, stability control, airbags, lane departure warnings, cruise controls, cars that park themselves, and all those things. So you'd think for us, that's a good thing. We know that accidents are typically involved, on average, cars that are 11 years old, so we can extrapolate out to 2031 and say, well, all the cars driving around that are involved in accidents there will be the same age profile, but they'll all have side curtain airbags and so on, and that'll reduce acquired brain injuries, and we can work all those trauma implications through that. But you also then think about vehicle automation and technology and the development of e-scooters, which are hugely popular in Europe, but they're a higher risk option. Great for the environment, great for getting out and about and zipping through traffic, not quite necessarily right for footpaths, not quite right for roads, and they're higher risk. So the same technological developments can create risk for us as well. The exponential increase in the gig economy, the amount of vehicles that are delivering things these days, whether it's food or parcels or whatever. So the nature of the traffic that we actually insure on a no-fault scheme is changing over time. So we think those things through as well. And then if I turn to like the social media age, I mentioned that, you know, getting that, the surveys around attitudes to drink driving, reducing that to 25% down to 5%. So then you think, well, how do we tackle that 5% in a day of social media where there's so many different avenues and options? If we go back to late 80s, early 90s, there was, you know, the ABC and 3 commercial TVs. So we could run an ad on a Sunday night, 8:30, Sunday night movie across all 3 commercial channels. We would get 95% of the population. Now with social media, there's all sorts of different avenues. There's people choosing where they want to get their news from and so on, digitally in the main. And we know that we have research saying that 5-year-old kids already know how to skip ads where that button is on their devices. So the challenges for government of actually translating those mega trends into what it means for your part of the public purpose sector and then driving change and dealing with it. There's risk and there's opportunities and challenges associated with all of that. The third bit then is understanding what's going on in your particular area. So if you're obviously local government, ratepayers, if you're the TAC, it's their clients. If it's a certain part of government, it's the key stakeholders, health services, patients, clients, and what have you. Like the importance of 2 things. One is I think the quantitative analysis. So you hear a lot about data analytics and so on, but I would also urge people to keep in mind the non-qualitative ways of gaining insights from your customers, clients, community stakeholders, and what have you. So on the quantitative side of things, you know, data analytics is it's used often these days, and I think people they jump to this kind of, well, it must mean super sophisticated software and all those kind of tools. But I think at the end of the day, you know, you should keep in mind that, you know, data can be captured through analysing the data that you've got already. It can be spreadsheets, dashboards, all those sorts of things. It's really the task of analysing the data that relates to your part of the world and the trends. And yes, there are much more sophisticated tools available these days. I think one thing I'd say on the quantitative side, it's really important to get below the averages of things. Just a few examples. I remember in the lead up to the Family Violence Royal Commission, I'm not sure whether it had been announced or it might have been commenced, but we felt in corrections that we should do more in that space. And in the end, surveyed prisoners and found that we have what's called their index offending, the reasons that they got a custodial sentence, and we get all the data for that. But we found that I think it was like 45 or 46% of prisoners had family violence as part of their background. So then you can develop programs and so on to address those issues by delving in a bit deeper. The Vpsc on the People's Matters survey, always think it's important, rather than you've got the organisational trends, and sure, if there's common themes around, we've got to do more in terms of grievances and all those various things, but it's really important to get down to individual workplaces to understand what's happening there. TAC, I don't know, we have like 30,000 clients a year and what have you, so we've designed the whole structure around the actual nature of the services that clients need to get their lives back on track. So we'd have 80% would be fairly rapid. They have a pretty straightforward injury, straightforward treatment. Sadly, 1% are going to be with us forever. But there's a cohort of that 19% in the middle where we just say, from our benchmarking and so on, our understanding of recovery, that they need more. Whether they've lost their jobs or they're depressed or angry or there's other things going on in their life. So I think getting below those sort of headline figures and understanding really what's happening to those cohorts is quite important. I mentioned the non-qualitative stuff because I think in this day and age we talk about community expectations and so on, and I think if you're going to meet the expectations of the community, you need to be more switched in, not just to what the data's telling us, but connecting to stakeholders in whatever field you're in the public purpose sector. I know from my experience, say in justice, we have lots and lots of data about overrepresentation and so on, but we have successive Aboriginal justice agreements, 5-year lots. I think we're up to the 4th. I was privileged enough to be there for the 3rd and 4th. And the frameworks that that's set up in terms of regional Aboriginal justice advisory committees and so on, just to gather insights into what's going on. Particularly, there's cohorts and then there's place, and you find that there'll be differences amongst cohorts, and there'll be differences in issues you're dealing with across Victoria. So I think data's important. I sometimes you would hate to think that people aren't doing the data analytics because they don't have really fancy tools. I think there's a lot out there, and I would worry if people thought all we need is data and let's not do the hard work of setting up the structures formally to tap into what people are saying and their insights, the people that you're actually designing things to serve or address or whatever the case may be. So if I go to the third point, your career almost. So if you've got a handle on the mega trends, you're thinking about how they translate to your part of the world, you've thought deeply about what are the sort of trends and issues that we can anticipate in your patch, so to speak. Then comes the thing, well, how do we actually embrace those opportunities? As we've talked about, there's lots and lots of opportunities in all sorts of different parts of the public purpose sector, lots of issues and problems to tackle, but how do you go about that as a professional in this space? So I've got like 7 points that I think would I guess set us up well for questions and things rather than me talking for too long. But I think if you think really, it's pretty basic. Like there's 2 things you need for change. You need the ideas and the proposals, and you need to get them agreed and adopted. So my first point is, where do you get the ideas and the proposals from? And as I reflect on my career in various roles I've had, if I had my time again, I think I'd probably be a bit more proactive as a younger professional, and basically, getting colleagues together and looking at those trends and understanding what it means for us, and having more of a deliberate, once or twice a year, like discussion sessions and so on, and generating ideas and so on as a way of doing things. Because I'd find in my career, wherever I've worked, there's always been the kind of strategy and policy unit, or there's been an invitation to attend a retreat or a planning session from your boss. So I think, you know, you should embrace all of those things and contribute to them wholeheartedly. But I think there's room to actually think through, you know, those kind of more perhaps informal working with your colleagues and tackling issues in where you work, or as young IPA, across sectors, across different arms of the public purpose sector. I think that would be good. The second point I'd make is the importance of understanding how decisions are made. So they'll be different if you're in a government department and you're wanting to propose reforms of legislative change or significant funding or whatever, than from, say, initiatives at a local government level or an NGO, or in my case, in my early career in statutory corporations like Melbourne Water or whatever. You know, you convince an executive, the executive's on the management team goes and presents to the board, and it's done. Whereas I'd find, like, the bigger the reforms and the more complex they are, and the more they're multi-agency, you need to allow much more time, and you need to understand how those processes work through to give your particular proposals the best chance of success. And I think, you know, if you get overawed by some of those things, it's not good, like having really, really good ideas sitting in the bottom drawer that just never got traction. And it's not good having ideas that are a bit mediocre and they get approved, but they don't really tackle the issues, because it's easier to get them done, if you know what I mean. So I think understanding all that works and how it works, and with respect to your particular organisational part of the public purpose sector, is quite important. The third thing I reckon is, you often see you get these big ideas, mega trends and statements about we need to do this, tackle something, da 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 da. And I think it's quite important to actually identify scalable actions and be quite specific about things. Like, how do you translate that thinking into something that you're going to present to your leaders, and to say, this is what I want you to approve, I want you to adopt this. So it needs to be kind of tangible enough, and you need to be specific enough to say to executives, like for us, Adam, as secretaries, it'd be like ministers and cabinet. Younger professionals, in my case, it might have been, you know, my supervisor on a smaller scale change proposal. But either way, I think it's important to be quite clear about those things. The fourth thing, I should say, and that scalable, I also think the merits of incremental change. Like, quite often you see people, they want everything as big policy proposals, and if it's nothing, well, they just walk away and the problem's not solved. But sometimes making these clear, specific initiatives scalable means you can actually achieve certain things, like a step along the way, and those things actually then provide you with the evidence base to make the case for the subsequent stages. So that quite specific, scalable actions, being clear on what you're asking executives, is quite important. Now, the fourth thing, I think, and this is another caution about data, I think it's framing the problems correctly, almost like here's what the opportunity is, or here's the problems that we want solved. And the logic of that structure then dictates where you want data, rather than say, well, let's gather all the data we can with all the wonderful tools and search things and what have you, and then just stare at it and say, well, what are we going to do with that? Wait for something to leap out at you. I think it's important to actually, in that process of understanding and anticipating, translating those things into like a problem statement or questions or hypotheses to actually guide the data that you want, which then helps make your case to leaders. Fifth thing, dealing with risk. By definition, anticipating things into the future is uncertain, and therefore there's risk around that stuff. And my view is that it's much better as a young professional to be upfront and clearly identify what those risks are, articulate what they are, and include mitigation strategies for them, rather than just leave them hanging around. And I think it's also important, if you're presenting to executives, talk about the risk of not adopting what you're proposing. So I think it is challenging, and it always provides a reason not to do things. So I think as a young professional, it's really important to actually be upfront about that. Don't sort of gloss over them. Actually find mitigation strategies, and as I say, compare that to the option of not doing what you want to do. The sixth thing is your mindset. As Gio mentioned at the beginning, whenever I've heard the changes in the new normal, I keep thinking back, like I've worked in the public sector since I was 18, which is 40 years. And I don't reckon there's been 1 year in that 40 years where the prevailing mood isn't change is the new normal. I think other than saying the last 10 years, it's the rate of change, I think is the thing that's been pretty extraordinary. So I think just having a mindset that is normal. I remember, as you would, Adam, when I started, I was appointed to a deputy secretary role in Premier and Cabinet in July 2008. And I thought, and I was in a pretty, I was comfortable where I was as the chair of the Essential Services Commission, independent body. I'd kind of been there, I knew how it all worked. All of a sudden I find myself briefing the Premier and all the briefs on the various cabinet items and things. And I remember thinking after a couple of months, you know, this is going okay, like it's getting into the rhythm of things. And then in September 2008, Lehman Brothers, which is like one of the largest investment banks in the US, filed for bankruptcy. And then AIG may have done, there's a string of them, which then kicked off in earnest the global financial crisis. And I remember this kind of working really hard to make sure the Premier and others, we were thinking of ideas to actually, what could we do to stimulate the economy in Victoria, given the impacts of the GFC. And then of course the Rudd government came up with the stimulus packages, and then we worked really hard to make sure we got our share of the money, which meant we needed to make sure we knew where it was going to be spent. Worked like crazy until I think it was January. And then I remember January, the heat wave. I don't know if people would have remembered that. There was pictures on the front page of the papers of rail workers hosing down, buckling train lines and what have you. And then to work from the Department of Health determined subsequent to that, there was something like 360 people died in the last week of January because of the heat, over and above the normal rates you'd expect. And then a week or so later, it was the tragic events of Black Saturday and all the recovery effort and all the work around that. And then a month after that, there was the outbreak of the swine flu, H1N1, and all those issues. So when I reflect on that 6 or 7 months, I think, well, I couldn't have anticipated those things, but you just have to adapt and recognise that you can't anticipate everything. So it's kind of, and it's tiring, and you need to make sure that when you do find those back-to-back events that you're actually looking after yourself and making sure that you know, you and your colleagues and so on, because these things can happen one after the other, and they're quite demanding. And the seventh thing and the final thing I'll say before handing over to questions is like your career and the benefits of experiencing change yourself. As is noted in the introduction, I've had the benefit of working in, I've been involved in various statutory corporations, the central agencies work, Treasury and Premiers led to portfolio departments, and I've been a regulator. So I've kind of, the benefits of moving around, experiencing different problems, different cultures, different perspectives and so on, expanding your networks. I think it's certainly helped me in my career, just understanding how the public purpose sector works and having experienced it firsthand. So the one thing I would encourage you with change and uncertainty, it's going to keep going, accept that, embrace it, and yeah, and move around the public, take advantage of the fact that public purpose sector's pretty good on development and so on, those opportunities, like initiate things yourself, secondments or whatever else, and as I say, soak up all that different experience, embrace change. I know there's risk associated, it can be quite challenging, but I think there's just so much to achieve and so many opportunities, and the often almost cliched, you know, making a difference, that will make you much stronger and much more capable of doing that in your careers. So that's all I really wanted to cover, Adam. It's just my insights on change and the tools and the capability, and some thoughts on how young professionals in the public purpose sector can go forward and anticipate change and drive change.
Fantastic. Well, Greg, thank you so much for your introductory remarks. I can already see some questions coming through, and you may have seen from Kim's note, Kim from IPA, go and look at the Q&A box. We're already getting some good questions in there, and you can vote them up as well, so we get a sense of things you really want Greg and I to focus on. Firstly, Greg, just reflecting. Well, there was a bit of reverb there. To start with, I mean, some of the examples you went through were quite remarkable. Just in the last few years, you've talked about within your career things like the gig economy and the whole of the media changing from old style media where everyone watched a show on Sunday night to Google and Facebook, cybersecurity, behaviour change, climate change. Then you went to the more specific things that we can think about as people in the public purpose sector and public professionals around those tools to anticipate change. And I really like those examples about, even though megatrends can feel really big and overwhelming, they're only one click away on the internet. And importantly, you can then talk to your colleagues and your networks to think about what to do. And then particularly those 7 points, it's not just getting colleagues together, but what are the tangible, scalable things you can do in your teams that are right in front of you? So I really like how you went from the very big to the very specific, because I find at times of enormous change, we can get overwhelmed. We can think, my God, here I am in lockdown. I don't even know where to start. The news is at me every day, so I'm feeling overwhelmed. Moving from that to, well, actually, I work in this really interesting part of government in, say, corrections. We've got interesting data. We've been in this space for a long time. What can we do right here, right now in our team to make a difference there? So as a quick summary, Greg, I really love the way you've gone from the really big to the very specific. And you've given so many good examples of how that's occurred throughout your career. While we're waiting for more questions to come through, and there are already heaps of questions, the one I'm going to start with is you had a really good summary of what was happening in 2008, 2009. GFC, heat wave, Black Saturday, swine flu. Now, in a sense, what we're experiencing now is a 1 in 50 year event. But then when we look back at the GFC and those series of events, including the impact right into Victoria of heatwave and Black Saturday, that was an enormous time of change. So can you, do you see some parallels, and can you think of specific examples of some of the younger people you were working with back then, younger professionals who adapted well to that change that you can share with the group today?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and it was in DPC, so it's a little bit, the role is quite specific, and it's Premier to Prime Minister, Premier fronting, in the case of Black Saturday, out there every day, setting up all those cabinet committees. You'd remember, Adam, like it's just all hands on deck. So I think the younger people then, one of the most important things was being able to tap into their networks across other departments to get that advice more quickly. So like I'd reflect, one, their resilience, but two, the ability to actually pull together advice, whether it's, well, what do we, I remember like right up until Christmas, like a special, cabinet meetings to consider all these ideas and things. So someone's got to generate those. I remember the stimulus package saying, well, we're not going to get any money unless we can show where we want to spend it. It can't just be on the never, never. So dealing with back then DHS and health and so on, being able to tap into those people to assemble those ideas really quickly, and really, really quickly. It's like, we're meeting the Prime Minister tomorrow kind of thing, all happened at breakneck speed. And then the agility, particularly around the recovery process, the trauma of Black Saturday, to do things that are a bit out of your comfort zone, like, getting a Red Cross phone line sorted out, getting that temporary accommodation and so on from, turning ships around and things like that. Having, was it Major John Cantwell, Adam, like the army walking around on the second floor at One Treasury Place. It was just that preparedness to be all hands on deck. So I think the resilience, the flexibility, the connections to other departments where when times are tough and there's need to work really quickly on things, the ability to have those relationships and contacts and so on as a network of people to assemble the best advice for the government at the time when there's not a lot of time and they're critical issues has been quite important. And I often reflect on that when I observe the beginning of this year with the tragic bushfires in East Gippsland and southern New South Wales, when I look at Premier, Minister, Andrew Crisp, the CFA volunteers, all the efforts going on, and then follow that up with COVID, and the magnitude of that's just off the scale compared to anything I've ever dealt with. So you're reminded of how resilient people can be, but they're all they're at their best when the public purpose sector is at its best in terms of that timely, accurate advice and the resilience and the flexibility to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think they're great examples, and we do, even though we are in the midst of a huge crisis across Australia and the world, it's when we look back, we don't have to look too far back to see other examples of, even though they weren't at the same scale, we had to change the way the things we were doing, across the public sector. I think one thing I learned, particularly under your leadership and when I was back in Premier and Cabinet and, thereafter, was one of your, the thing, and you said this again today, getting colleagues together. I remember the way I had framed it is, don't look up, look across. So when something happens and hits, yes, you can always think, well, I wonder what my boss is going to tell me to do next, or what is the Minister or the Premier or the PM going to say? Now, of course, those people who are in positions of elected responsibility or senior public service, yes, that is a leadership role. But I like the idea as well, looking across, how am I checking in with my colleagues are doing? Particularly those who've got good networks, whether it's through YIPA or other things like the graduate program or just the contacts you've got across, say, Victorian public sector. What are your friends and colleagues doing in their roles in your organisation and in other organisations? Because then when someone from up comes down and says, okay, we're going to do something, how do you say, well, we've been thinking about that and here's a few ideas. And so I really like that idea of getting colleagues together and looking across and looking around your networks and not underestimating the fact that you'll have that many insights. The one other question I want to ask, Greg, before I move to the questions coming through is, you talked about, at the start of your introduction, you talked about things like defamation laws and social media and behaviour change, particularly in some of the work you did in justice, and also we look at Transport Accident Commission that does some global best practice in behaviour change. Have you got examples of where younger professionals in your organisations can really step up and make a difference in things like social media, where people of a different vintage may not have even been on social media before? So can you give examples of how very experienced public servants can learn from next generation professionals as the world changes very rapidly?
I can give you plenty because I rely on it so much. I'm not on any social media, so I'm just. But no, there's the whole transformation of the communication arms of every single public purpose entity, as I say, whether it's a small NGOs or big departments, and embracing all of that. And I think as a leader, you're comforted knowing that that's actually happening. There's things in a digital age. I remember, like in the setup of the Mental Health Royal Commission, the government wanted to consult on the terms of reference. So the whole, you get put in touch with the Engage Victoria people in DPC. We designed something, and there's something like, and this is consulting in January, which is probably not the best time, but I'm pretty sure we had something like over 8,000 submissions through those digital means and things. So I'm really grateful of, behavioural insights people, the social media people, the digital people, that there are so many young public servants that know how to maximise the value of those tools. But you've seen those like apps in emergency management and various other things, and the whole, how we can communicate much more quickly in emergencies and things like that. It's just, it's a classic example as a leader where I'm not an expert in any of it, but I know it's there, I know it's needed, and I really value the people like young professionals today that are good at those sorts of things. But there's, it's just a way of doing things these days, and I'm incredibly grateful that there are plenty of young professionals, like they've grown up with that sort of stuff and they're experts at it.
Yeah, I think that's a great reflection on phrases like digital natives. And you make a good point as well about the humility that is important in public sector, because even if some people have been in many very senior roles, we're always learning from others. And I know you've been a strong proponent of how do you learn from others coming through. And through that, one of my messages to YIPA members is don't underestimate the insights, skills and energy that you will bring, and that people like Greg or myself, whether it's as a secretary or a chair of a board or a commission, will be saying, well, you know, we know this is important, but who are the people in our organisation and who can we talk to that really understand this stuff? So don't underestimate your opportunity to put your hand up and say, well, I've been thinking about this idea and, you know, I've been doing this for 5 years, or I did a startup and now I'm in government and this is what I learned.
I think, yeah, the other thing, if I can jump in, Adam, just an extension of that, I guess, is more like, like there's knowledge of social media and all those sorts of things, but then there's actually cohorts and the co-design things. So if we're thinking about Aboriginal justice issues and what the ideas you need, or youth justice issues, like you talk to young people that have much better insights than I ever would, kind of thing. So I think there's that, the knowledge of a different generation in terms of technology and so on. And then I think there's perspectives that you need to tap into from cohorts that will be much better placed than, say, I would, examining some of these issues, and just a willingness to do that, whether it's young people or different stakeholders and so on, family violence sector, that kind of thing. So I think it's just a good discipline to have, or a preparedness, a willingness to do that deliberately.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, Greg, I'm going to move to some of the Q&As. There's some really good questions that are coming through, and some that are clearly rising up to the top in terms of your feedback as YIPA members. I'm going to go first to one from Ronnie. And Ronnie, thank you for your question. And this is about consultation. Now, this is a nice hook into what you were saying earlier, Greg, about examples, for example, the TAC, or you've got to do quick consultation and it's January. The question from Ronnie is, how do you balance appropriate external consultation without spreading fear about anticipated change, or creating an impression you'll action something? So it's the classic managing expectations. And it also picks up on one of the challenges in the public sector is the fear that once we go out public, we're going to get told off by somebody. So what are your reflections, Greg, around that external consultation and also fear of change?
I really noticed it when I joined the Essential Services Commission, like having come from Treasury, and you'd be putting up proposals, and, you know, cabinet submissions would have that anticipated response kind of thing, and you'd find yourself predicting what it is because you haven't been able to talk to anyone, to like an Essential Services Commission or others where you've got a process that's been authorised by government, and you go out and ask people what you have consultation papers and issue. And by the time you get to the end of it, you've got a really good sense of what people want. But when you've got a situation where you're not quite authorised to do that, you certainly need to connect with people to get their insights to inform what you're going to put up. It hasn't been approved yet. As Ronnie, it was, you know, you don't want to overpromise and create an expectation, nor do you want to scare the horses. I think two things. One, the benefit of actually having relationships and formal connections with committee structures and things, even though committees sound terribly bureaucratic, but I'm thinking there's community safety committees that VicPol have, local government will have heaps of vehicles, NGO arrangements, task forces, networks, and where you can build up a trusted network of stakeholders where you can actually do that. And you can be, I think it's really important to be authentic about those things. If these things haven't been decided yet, we want your views, they're only ideas, like qualify them and be clear about that sort of stuff. And then other than that, I think it's really tapping into the more informal sources or pursuing agreement by your masters to say we want to actually get approval for like targeted stakeholder consultation, by making the case that it's imperative that you have that, because if you miss the mark, these reforms or these proposals will fail. So I think there's that graduated informal contacts, proper networks, always being authentic and honest about where you're at in the consultation, and preferably getting the blessing from your masters to do that. But as I say, if you don't, you rely a lot on trust and honesty with people that you can bounce ideas off.
That's a great response, Greg. And it reminded me of, particularly for the older generations, we often come back to Monty Python examples. The best hospital in the world is the one where there are no patients, because nothing can go wrong when there are no patients. And to me, if you've got the best policy or program design and you haven't tested it with anyone in the community, it's a bit like that hospital where there are no patients. And in some ways, the sooner you can get out there and test, discuss, engage, the better. Sometimes the political realities mean we've got to work it through ministers first. So how, and as you said in your answer, Greg, how do we have lots of different ways of engaging the informal, the trusted stakeholders, the emerging digital information and data around community attitudes, and then the good old-fashioned get out there and do the consultation. And I know when I've been in senior public service roles, I'm sometimes the opposite thing. We've just got to get out there, listen and hear what the community is going to say, and then in respect and out of respect for ministers, make sure that they're very well prepared and briefed so that we're all hearing together from the community. And sometimes you've got to do that really fast. Sometimes you do it through a very structured process. But as soon as you can get out there and build that confidence around external consultation, often the better your policy program or rollout is going to be.
And I think, if I can jump in, like being upfront that we're just gathering ideas. We're not preempting anything. And I remember in the 2003-4 water reforms, in the old days, there was concepts of green papers and white papers, in mainly, I guess, a UK thing. But you can go out and say, well, we all understand what the problems are, or engender that understanding, and then we want your views on ideas for change without creating an expectation that change is actually going to happen, or if it is happening, their particular idea is going to get adopted. TAC, we had with Minister Pulford at the time, a range of regional forums on road safety ideas and so on from around the state, but it was all on the basis that we want your input. And I find, like most state, and I've been in sort of all sorts of, town halls and country towns on water issues and various other things, that people are typically, grateful that you're there to listen. They're not going to say, oh, well, if my idea doesn't get up, I'm not going to bother offering it. So, in fact, it's probably the opposite. There's a wealth of opinions out there on most of the issues we deal with. It's just a way of tapping into them, as Ronnie alluded to, without over-promising or whatever. But it does require a lot of thought to make sure you're honest and open with people and don't create the wrong impressions.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And again, the benefit that YIPA members can bring is, even before we might go out for public consultation, the interesting thing about being either a public servant or in the public sector or in the public purpose sector is that we're all members of the community as well. So before that moment we go out, we can share our own reflections and say, well, this is what I would do, or what I think, or as a member of my community. But at the same time, when you've got those other networks you can constantly tap into, and you said before, how do you expand your networks as a young professional? Getting involved in a work context with those peak industry groups, getting involved in consultation yourself. If you get the opportunity, even if it's not in your square role, just the look of relief you see for a lot of community members when someone's there to listen and talk and listen. And I know I had been, from the very start of my career, getting out there, I think, for aircraft noise consultation when I was a grad, all the way through to when I was a secretary and getting out to Far East Victoria to do forest harvesting consultation. Really difficult stuff. And the community and the appreciation of the community that someone is there to listen to them is quite profound. And that often is half the success in consultation. And then, of course, it's genuinely listening and learning. Greg, I'll go to the next question. This question has now crept up to the top of the charts, and it's from Mel Nisbet. So thank you, Mel. In previous sessions at YIPA, we've heard about building our influence. This is particularly relevant to advocating for change. So Greg, how would you suggest that young professionals go about building our influence?
Well, I think if everyone does the sorts of things we were talking about and just discussing around knowledge, understanding of like megatrends, development of ideas, the networks, moving around and contributing to different things, and moving around career-wise as well, you soon develop a reputation for someone that's incredibly thoughtful, insightful, considered, and is a strong contributor. And if you do that with colleagues, then all of a sudden you've got a cohort of young professionals. You think these people are really worth listening to. They've thought hard about things. They haven't sat around and waited to be invited to a session on megatrends or whatever. They're actually thinking about stuff. And they're proposing things in ways that can be adopted, whether it's scalable or whatever. And I do, as I say, moving around, I think, and being involved in joint things is one of the best things, because people like older leaders will get a better sense of who's who, and you expose yourself to more, different organisations and different leaders and executives and so on different issues, and that's how you'll start making a stronger influence and an impact.
Yeah, I think that's a good reflection, Greg. And I found in some of the more traditional ways we work across the public sector and the public service, things like interdepartmental committees and working groups, sometimes people roll their eyes and think, not another IDC, but they're often the first opportunity you get to work with people from justice or health or education or environment or treasury and central agencies. So that at the very least gives you a feel for that. And similarly, if you're in a public sector statutory authority, some of those meetings you have with the department or with other regulators, for example, they're the first opportunities to get those different perspectives, build your networks. And I think I learned throughout my whole career that networks and developing them in ways that you're comfortable with, because not everyone's an out there extrovert. There are plenty of opportunities through working groups and consultation processes to develop those networks. And it seems to me, and I hear from your reflections, Greg, that that's a great building block to, to go back to the question from Mel, building influence to then advocating for change. Yeah. There's another good question that's going up to the top from Julia Hegarty, and I think I remember Julia was in Delp a few years ago, although she may be somewhere else now. You gave that really good example of 0809 and the GFC, the bushfires and swine flu. So Julia's question is, based on your experience, what reflections did you have on what worked or didn't work for recovery that we should be thinking about right now following the fire season and COVID in Victoria?
Actually, the audio broke up just just at the beginning of that question. So I was basically thinking back to like 2009 and the lessons learned there for
what worked, didn't work for recovery.
Yeah, well, I can actually see that. Like, we've got to remember there was a Royal Commission after 2009, so there's a lot of things changed across the whole emergency management sector. So as a relative outsider these days, notwithstanding I've just been made the chair of the CFA, but until then, like through January, February, March, observing things from the outside, you kind of thought there's been a lot of learnings from 2009, but it's hard to separate out what were learnings in terms of the way we do things now compared to how much of what we do now is as a result of the structural changes and so on around emergency management, Victoria, and the whole, more joined up processes, more documented plans, more oneness about, preformed IMTs and all those sorts of things. So I think there's definitely been a lot of learnings, and I think they were translated into changed emergency management arrangements. And then I think you can see those things going forward. As I say, from the outside, I can't really comment on how it's been going on the inside, but I think the importance of learning from these, major tragic events is just, it's just so important, whether it's a Royal Commission or, an IGEM inquiry or whatever, learning from that and making the changes. And I think from what I can see, that's worked quite well, as I say, from the outside, with Andrew Crisfroll, the Minister for Police and Emergency Services, and even the interaction with the Commonwealth. I can't comment on, when things were asked for or whatever, but it seemed to be managed pretty well from the outside looking in. But I think a lot of that was due to the structural changes following the Royal Commission into the bushfires in 2009.
Yeah, and maybe I'll indulge and add a couple of reflections because you've triggered some thoughts, Greg. I remember after you mentioned the bushfires and the Royal Commission. Now, Royal Commissions don't come along very frequently, and they're very full-on events. They have big impacts on public servants. Importantly, they're learning and deep learning opportunities for us to reflect and learn. So I do remember there was the Black Saturday Bushfire Royal Commission, which was 2009 and probably moving into 2010 or 2010. I remember it might have been about 2015 or 2016, we had a really bad, what was known in bushfires, a bad spike day coming up. So temperatures above 43 degrees. It was about the third or fourth day of extremely high temperatures. And the night before this spike day, the Emergency Management Commissioner, Craig Lapsley, and his job was set up as a result of that Royal Commission. He recirculated a summary of the Bushfire Royal Commission findings. And he just said to a lot of us decision makers, just reflect tonight on what we might have to do tomorrow. And as it turned out, that spike day wasn't anywhere as catastrophic as Black Saturday, but it was really important to say, well, we go through these things quite frequently in the broad scheme of things, so let's not forget. And a lot of the learnings from that Royal Commission was just good communication across decision makers, very important communication into communities. And a lot of those things will have applied for years and decades and will apply to pandemics, bushfires, swine flu, economic crises. So on one hand, there's that importance of not forgetting what's gone recently. And that'll apply too. Right now, we have the Commission of Inquiry around our response to COVID in Victoria. And these are controversial processes because it requires public servants to present to independent committees. The learnings from that will be so important for how we respond and shape the work we do. And importantly, to acknowledge that everybody is putting in best efforts. So these are not about blame, these are about learning opportunities. So I found that from those specific events, we see the way that other communities or economies learnt from, say, earlier outbreaks of bird flu or swine flu, and now apply that to how we respond to COVID. So, and I think the other reflection I'll make is that what are those fundamentals it comes back to about good community consultation, good community communication in times of crises, and importantly, communication across. So there
I think the other thing I'd say is the learnings from Black Saturday. I mean, community, we often talk about the future of the public service and where it's heading and so on. And I know Chris Eccles gave a talk to, it was an IPA thing, I think, a few years back about outcomes. So when like to me, there's a community expectation about like oneness and unification and everyone working together. So you think emergency management, you had private land, public land, CFA, DSC, Parks Victoria, whatever. And those reforms have basically said there'll be preformed incident management teams. And if there's a fire, whoever was on duty that day, doesn't matter where they were from, you're the incident controller. Yeah. And I remember the first one was Kentbrook down near Portland. And all of a sudden, all those people just had their roles and they forgot about where they were from. And there was that kind of oneness. But to me, you seem to get that out of emergencies and crises. The challenge for governments will be, how do you do that for, say, family violence or mental health reforms, or just the day-to-day, hence my kind of, I guess, advice around getting together to tackle problems, because increasingly I think that's what people will want. Everyone working together and get the best of everyone to deal with an issue, whether it's like a real bushfire or the metaphoric one of tackling change as we go forward.
Yeah. Great reflections, Greg. Now we're getting to, we've got about five or 10 minutes to go before I hand back to Gio. And there's still lots of really good questions coming through. There's two questions, both from anonymous attendee, which I'm going to draw together. One is about the biggest changes that governments are grappling with right now. And the second is the long-term effects of COVID on the way we work in Victoria. So thinking about those changes on our sector itself, what do you see as perhaps one or two big ones that we're going to have to grapple with as public sector and public professionals?
I think if I start with the second one first, COVID, I think it's probably too early, but obviously the way we work, I mean, you remember, Adam, like the all roles flex push with BSB, and you said sort of examples of where people could work from home or what have you. Like I know at the TAC, there's 1,000 people working remotely within 3 days, and we just did it. So thinking through all of those things, I think I haven't got the answers or formed a view as to what the long-term implications will be, but I know it's going to be important to examine all those issues. And I think the way we work and the way we're communicating here today, and what goes on in the private sector around travelling and all these things, all of those are going to be learnings, and I'm hoping that some of them will be enduring as well. And what was the first one was actually the challenges more generally. Was it?
Yeah, the biggest changes that governments are grappling with right now in the context of COVID.
Yeah, I think so. There's all the opportunities around social media, technology, digitalisation, like the tools and the methodologies and community expectations. Like, to me, the biggest thing for the public purpose sector will be, I guess, an expectation, as I say, that the public purpose sector will work together to deal with problems, improve services, whatever they might be, from the old, I guess, the formally established ministerial accountabilities, portfolios, silos. People are, I've had that many forums and things where, country Victoria, what are we going to do about ice? And you say, oh, well, get my treatment done, or DHS will answer that one, or the police will do it. Like, expectations that government will be agile, flexible, and tackle these challenges in an effective way, and what that actually means for the way we work. As I say, ministerial portfolio, budgets are allocated on a portfolio, or they have a title, this is an initiative funding, this is what this money's for. Like, how to crack those complex problems that community expects the public purpose sector to crack, when the underlying setup of our structure of government is ministers and portfolios and departments and tiers of government and that kind of thing. How do we actually adapt to be able to take on those challenges using the tools we've got today?
Yeah, and Greg, I think that's an excellent reflection, because I've worked at the Commonwealth, state, and I've done a lot of work with local government. I've done a lot of work into the public sector, and then I consulted in the private sector. And you said this earlier on in your presentation or your discussion, that because of digitisation and customer expectation, if we're on an app to, say, Telstra or the bank, we just want them to give us some money or fix up our NBN, and we don't want to hear, oh, that's not us, that's the online wholesale customer delivery part of our organisation. We just say, well, you're my provider, can you please fix it? At the same time, when we're consulting on behalf of government, we might say, oh, that's not us, that's local government, or that's not us, that's the Commonwealth government or state, or that's a water authority, or some sort of other part of government. And the community will say, well, if I can get my money through my app and I can order online food and clothes, why can't you just sort out my issue? Now, there's a lot of complexity that sits behind that, but the digital age and customer expectation means we can no longer ignore that. And I think that goes to some of your reflection on the big effects of COVID on the way we work in Victoria, and also how government works. Yeah.
And how quickly these things, it's just one of those things, crises, like, they're terrible, but they're galvanising, and people rise to the occasion and work together. It's kind of, well, how do you actually do more of that in the day-to-day business of the public purpose sector to tackle some of the issues that are more enduring and ongoing, or whether they're just straight out service improvements to meet citizen expectations and so on. How do we actually do more of that as professionals in the public purpose sector, I think, is the challenge.
Yeah. All right. Now,
while still meeting all those parliamentary accountability. I mean, it's a fact that you've got parliaments, critical institutions for democracies, an ombudsman, the Auditor General, opposition question time, two houses, all those sorts of things. They're like the cornerstone of the democracy. So that's a fact. It's how do you actually do what we've just been talking about, given that those things remain. Yeah,
and that's a good point too, Greg, that we're not, for those who on this call who are working in the public service or public sector, we're not a privately owned energy company, and we're not a TV company. We are representing elected officials, and we are spending taxpayers' money. So at the same time, there is that level of accountability, and that is the challenge. How do you balance good service delivery to citizens with accountability, because we're using those same citizens' taxpayer dollars? I reckon we've got time for about 2 more questions, and then I'll hand back to Gio. So there's a good one that's come up, and you've touched on this already, about wicked problems that require large-scale change. And the examples are ones you've discussed, like climate change, gender inequality, domestic violence, inequities with Aboriginal Australians. You made the point before that in responding to a crisis like a pandemic or a bushfire, it can be pretty clear in the next few weeks, months, we've got to do X, Y, Z. For some of these wicked problems that have been with us for decades and if not centuries, what pathways do you see for us to address these issues where action just seems so slow and wicked or difficult?
Yeah, I mean, they're wicked for that reason almost, aren't they? That's just, but I just reflect on, say, Aboriginal justice issues, and like we put all the foundations in place with Aboriginal justice agreements and have Aboriginal justice forums and connect with the community and tap into everything we can and work hard as we can to get incremental change. And sometimes you think, well, there's various governments with law reform agendas that seem to have a disproportionate impact on, like, you're working really hard and not getting as far as you want. The family violence action plan, I think we're just going to say that's a 10-year action plan. This is, centuries of gender inequality playing out and all these sorts of things. It's going to take a long time. So I think there's thinking through, like, where do we want to be? There's an acceptance of saying this is a wicked problem and it's going to take a long time. And there's, being upfront about that, but being quite determined to actually start with small steps on that journey. I think ultimately that seems to be inevitable, rather than saying, well, is there a fix that we've missed here that we can tackle these things more quickly? Obviously, you think about sequencing, like do one thing has a benefit for something else, and where do you get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of reforms? But I think deep thinking about the problem, where we want to be, all the sorts of things we want to tackle, what are the priorities, how do they line up better in a sequence so they build off each other and leverage off each other and start, and just it's all I think you can do with those really, really entrenched wicked problems.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And it's a good reminder that these wicked problems will be always with us. And in some cases, we are making progress. In other cases, progress is not success. We've got to just keep coming back.
Yeah. And can I just jump in there, Adam, just one more point? I think on that, when you've got these wicked problems that last for a long time, it is really important to reflect on progress. So I think about, I don't know the exact numbers, but Aboriginal kids that have completed year 12 in Victoria, I'm sure it's like, 10 years ago, it might have been 20 or 30, now it's 500 or so. I don't know the exact figures, but it's important to just reflect on progress that has been made, just to help with that kind of, I know it's hard yards and it's taking a long time, but it's like just to reflect on where we've been over, say, 10 or 15 years is quite a useful tool to help people motivated and remain determined to fix these problems into the future.
Yeah, I reckon that's a great reflection, Greg, because I know in some of the work I did back when I was at DELP, and I know there's a few DELPers on the call today, in things like gender equality, we did get change. So we went from, I think it was 28% women in the exec to 50%. And my two reflections on that, firstly, how do we lock that change in? And second, so we keep it going. And secondly, how do we learn from that change for, say, Indigenous employment in government or disability engagement or tackling other issues of sexual identity or community engagement? So you're right, it's like a continuous process, but when you make some achievement or some progress, it's good to acknowledge that, keep working on it, and then perhaps learn from that for other parts of the areas that you work in. Yeah. Well, I'll give you the last question now, and then we'll hand back to Gio and Kim. This is from Steph, who is from DELP, from my memory, Steph Gort. And this is a good one for IPA to finish on, I think. How do you advise young professionals to push back against the "it's always been done this way" cohort who may be resistant to internal change? So this goes to a part of your reflection, Greg, is change often starts with your team and your organisation and stuff right in front of you. What are some of the things you've seen that have worked well where you've got people, I don't know, we've always done it this way, leave us alone? How do you make change as a young professional in that context?
Well, I think there's two things. Yeah, we've always done it this way. This is why we are where we are. If there's problems, pointing out that it's not working, or looking into the future, it could work better. So there's presenting opportunities and presenting them in a way that's recognising, you know, if something's like a step up and an improvement, what those gains might be. But if something's just not working and there's a myriad of different problems and the way of doing it in the past just has to change, it's really being able to present, here are the sorts of problems that we've got now, here's how they can be fixed with change, go through that process I talked about in terms of identifying that, you know, grabbing the data and all the evidence and so on, so that it's just inarguable what you're presenting, and it's positive and it's constructive and it's not being critical of the past, but it's preempting problems that we're going to avoid, or it's highlighting opportunities that we're going to capture.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great way to bring that to that bigger picture of change. Now, we are running out of time. I'm about to throw back to Gio. A couple of very quick follow-ups. I think in the both the chat box and also the Q&As, someone else said that they went and saw Iggy Pop and the Stooges, so that's good to know. And someone else asked, who was the other secretary that's seen Iggy Pop and Nick Cave? And it was Jim Betts, who's a secretary up in New South Wales and our former secretary in Victoria. So there's for a few updates for those following the various chat boxes. Shout out to Simon Fazio, who's seen Iggy and the Stooges. Greg, I'll thank you. Your experience in the Victorian public sector is immense and impressive, and so is the refreshing way you approach these issues. You've contributed so much leadership, and I've been a privileged recipient of your support, and I've been part of your impact across the public sector. So thank you for your time today with YIPA. I've loved the conversation, and I'm looking forward to reconnecting with you and many other people on this call when we eventually get back to a different way of working. Gio, I will, so in thanking Greg, I'll just ask for a quick virtual clap. I'm going to give Greg a clap, and everyone else, we can imagine, Greg, the cheers across Victoria and wherever people are dialing in from. Gio, I'll hand to you for some next steps and thank yous and summaries. So thank you, Greg.
Thanks, much appreciated. Pleasure.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. And thank you to both Adam and Greg for what was such an insightful and fascinating discussion. I think we covered a lot of topic and a lot of ground there. And I you know, particularly like this idea from both Adam and Greg around connecting with networks and looking across to your peers and your colleagues. And I think there's a potential opportunity for YIPA to do some session around generating ideas. I think in today's time, in today's knowledge-driven economy, I think ideas are the currency. So maybe there is a future event around you know, connecting and generating ideas with colleagues and peers across the public purpose sector. But if you want to be across these events and other events from YIPA and the IPA series, please connect with us on LinkedIn. Check out the IPA Victoria website. There's heaps of programs to get involved in and immerse yourself in. And you know, while we're all in a virtual environment, leverage platforms like Facebook and LinkedIn, where YIPA has a following on, and feel free to connect with people on the call. I certainly look forward to connecting with a lot of the people dialed in. So I encourage you to check that out. But to bring this event to a close, just want to thank our speakers again. I want to thank our sponsors for making this this series happen. I'm also facilitating a panel discussion with Helena Hamilton from Deloitte tomorrow and Julian Hebden, the Chief Data Officer, to discuss data and public policy in Victoria. So I encourage you to check that out as part of a YIPA Masterclass series. At the end of this event, you'll notice a short survey pop up if it hasn't already done so. So if you just open up your browser, you should see a survey page that's open up. We really appreciate any feedback that you can provide us. That's going to help us make these types of events better. So please do that. But I just want to thank the audience for tuning in today. I want to thank, once again, the speakers and the sponsors. And it was really a fantastic event. So thank you, everyone.